Hi and welcome back to the channel, and in this episode we're under a very tight timeline, so let's get going. Yes, I know, we have promised a lot to get more videos out more regularly, and we just haven't got around to it for a number of reasons. However, this year, we haven't had a great deal of rally work on in the workshop. It's only really been bits and pieces. We haven't had much competition going on within the team, and we've only had one fairly reasonable size build, and that only happened a couple of weeks ago, and that was a real tight time frame. We didn't have time to film it, and so for the most part it's been okay. However, all of a sudden now we're under the hammer. We've got to get it done with our own cars. So this car here, we've got the motor out of it at the moment. It's got engine dramas, and we were going to sort that out, and for a number of reasons we just aren't going to get it done in time. So instead we've got this one out of the corner of the workshop, and we've got to get it done. It's one of our club level race cars, and we're going to turn it around for another event. It needs a fairly major rebuild on it. So we've got to do Campbell water pump in it, we've got to do a clutch in it, a whole bunch of bits and pieces on the engine, including engine mounts, transmission mount, and also we're going to be putting in a new ECU, and we've got to get that tuned. And we've got to do all this in about 3 days. Anyway, first step here is to get the workshop rearranged, and once we've got all that under control, then we can get this thing up in the air and start pulling the motor out. So it's before 8 AM on day one, which is actually a Monday public holiday. Yay! Nothing like working on a public holiday. Anyway, let's get into it. Through the magic of television, we've already got the workshop rearranged and sorted out, and then starting to get stuck into some of the engine removal. The radiator is draining at the moment whilst I'm doing these other bits and pieces. It has had a bit of water and mud under the bonnet, and there are a few bolts that tend to get a bit tight over time from that need a bit of CRC in them. One thing that I have just done off camera was cut the heater hoses off. That might seem like a strange thing to do. However, the heater unit in this car, it's got a fiberglass dash in it, and all the vents are missing anyway, so it doesn't actually circulate any air flow inside the car. The heater box in this car will remain in it, won't pull that out, but we certainly won't be using it. And in future, should we need to, we will put a heated screen in it, which is what we generally do with most of our motorsport conversion sort of work these days. Okay, amongst pulling the engine out of the car, I wanted to show you this standard version 5 or version 6 WRX Airbox. Common filter setup, plastic. So basically this end here goes through like a curved pipe that comes back into the engine bay. And the problem with the version 5.6, the reason that we are changing to a aftermarket ECU is because of these airflow meters that you can probably see. Hopefully the camera will pick it up inside there. These airflow meters are rubbish. They work not very well, and they fail all the time. The problem is that they don't bring up a check engine light. They give false readings to the ECU, which then generally leans out the mixtures, so makes the too much air and not enough fuel, and then ends up melting pistons. It's a very common thing, engine failures, because of these airflow meters, particularly if you run an oiled air filter element inside the standard box, or you use like a oiled pod filter. They're very, very common for failures. So we generally, if we keep the standard air box, like say in a road car, we've got to make sure that the air filter is good and that it is kept clean and dry all the time. Because the slightest sort of bit of dust in there or tiniest bit of oil, and the airflow meter's done. The other problem with these air boxes, which is common, we've already fixed this one once in the past. You can see we've got a piece of metal bolted on here because the plastic underneath that seals these on these tabs invariably cracks and breaks off, and then they just don't seal properly. And this was a problem almost from day dot with these things. They started fracturing very quickly, very early on in the piece, so it's not even an age thing. It was just not very well designed by Subaru, and along with this horrible airflow meter. Now, inside here, these basically hook over. They've got a hook, and you can see inside there it's got evidence of having moisture in it at some point, muddy water, and I can see probably the camera won't pick that up, but that has actually got through, and I can see some minor splashes there on the airflow meter, so that airflow meter's done anyway. And this is why that is very common, and that's all mud and water where this has been raced and it's gone through a puddle or something, and that is with all the proper pickups in it, so that it's not supposed to get any water in it, and it's got drains in it. However, this is why these air filter boxes, and it's a debate that I've had a few times. Even one customer, we actually fitted a pod filter to the car, and we've got a special way that we do that to stop water and mud getting into them, and the customer was adamant that it would be better to have the standard airbox in it, and asked us to put the standard airbox back in. We warned them against it, because when we pulled out the customer standard airbox, this is exactly what we found in there, with the air filter being all sad. They don't seal properly. This is a good quality air filter brand as well. They're just not up to the challenge for rallying. However, no, we ended up having to refit it for the customer with the standard airbox, and he was convinced. I think he got some advice from somebody else, which in our opinion wasn't probably the best, but that the standard airbox is the go. And so anyway, we are going to delete the airflow meter. It will stay in line, but it will no longer be giving instructions to the ECU or data to the ECU, and we won't be using this type of setup. We're going to a pod filter, and we will blank off the holes in the inner arch where the air filter, the factory air filter, goes through in an effort to keep the mud and the dirt out. And right, with the engine out now, let's take a quick look at what we've got. So that turbo, it's only a standard TDO4 turbo on it. That's fine, it's in good condition. Throttle body isn't ridiculously caked in oil, so that's a good sign. This clutch I know is knackered, it's shuddering. It's also very, very rusty. It's obviously been replaced at some point there, but yeah, looking, there's not much meat left down inside there by the look of that. We'll get that off and have a look shortly. These are the hoses I was talking about earlier on. These little hoses here give trouble, and so we will do something about that and re-sort those out so that they're not going to be an issue. This is not a standard intercooler that's been fitted to this car. It's got a GD intercooler. They're not an easy fit to get onto the GC engines, early EJ 205 engines. However, this has been modified. That's the blow-off valve recirculation hose there. That's not normally there. Anyway, all good. It's quite dirty and muddy. There's also a fair bit of oil on there, so this is going to get new rocker cover gaskets. It's common for these engines with a bit of age on them to start doing that. I did pop a cam belt timing cover off, just have a bit of a look-see. Don't know if you can see in there, the camera might be picking that up, but part of the rubber is beginning to run on that belt and the on the pulley, sorry, and also the pulley is starting to get a few marks on it. We couldn't find any markings on this belt, so we got no idea when the actual belt was done, so we're going to do this as a precaution. Also under here, these hoses that you can see, these 90-degree hoses that go to the oil cooler, they're not in great shape either. That, again, with age is another drama with them. They get hot from the exhaust manifolds in time, so we will replace those while we're at it. Something else that's very interesting that we weren't kind of aware of, this red stuff here is actually coolant. However, all this oil here on the timing cover is actually from the power steering pump. It's been leaking quite heavily by the look of that, which is interesting because the level hasn't gone down much, although you don't need a lot of oil in the power steering or any oil or liquid to make it look like a lot. So we will sort that out, either replace that power steering or reseal it. I suspect it's the top tank lid that's leaking, which is very common on these, and also a lot of oil has been leaking around here. Again, I think rocker cover gaskets. However, I am also aware that on top of the rocker cover gasket's leaking. The power steering return line, which sits about here somewhere, is also leaking a bit of oil, and also where it comes up to the oil power steering oil cooler here, that clamp was also leaking a bit. So we'll sort all that out while we're at it. Also replace this hose. I call it the question mark hose. It's a bypass hose that goes from the back of the header tank round under the manifold, and it looks like a question mark. This one is quite common to split with a bit of age and heat, so we'll change that out to be on the safe side. We'll also have a look at this coolant hose for the turbo. I think that one, we might have already replaced that one from memory. Don't remember. I checked the paperwork on that and look. Everything else looks pretty good. This engine is a pretty good runner. We'll give it plugs, but and oil filters and everything else that it needs. Give it some love. What I am going to do now is I think it's going to get a bit of a bath in some degreaser and a little bit of a pressure clean to try and get some of this oil and dirt and mud off it, so that we've got something clean to start with, and then we'll start getting it apart. Okay, as I suspected, things are not great as far as the clutch goes. It actually has had an aluminium STI plate put on there, this bypass plate, which is great news. Quite often we've got to change these because the plastic ones of these, and particularly the earlier engines, they leaked quite heavily, and they got an oil leak which she thought was a rear main seal and pulled it out and then found this plate. So that's been done, which is great. There is evidence that the gearbox has been out of it at some point in the past. The rear main seal is leaking, so we'll get a new rear main seal in there as well. Won't keep that. And then, as I suspected with the clutch, that flywheel definitely needs a good machine. It is got lots of hairline cracks in it. They'll all come out when they're machined. That clutch is quite burnt as well, and the plate is, well, it's not terrible, surprisingly, given how much the clutch is shuddering, but it's not in great condition. So we'll get a replacement clutch in there as well. We definitely won't reuse that while we got it apart. One of the questions that I'm likely to be asked is, why did we take the engine out to do this? I mean, we could have done all this in the car, and the answer is yeah, absolutely. However, being that we needed to do the clutch and all this stuff at the back of the engine, and we need to get in there and do the cam belt and timing and all that stuff at the front, plus all this other work, it's just easier to pull the motor out, do the whole lot, and then drop it back in. If we were doing sort of one or the other, we probably would have just pulled the gearbox out or just taken the radiator out and whatever. So that is the answer to that question before somebody asks it, because I know that'll come up in the comments. Okay, quick update. It's day 2 and it's just after 7 o'clock. It's quite cold this morning for a spring day. Anyway, didn't film sort of the latter stages of day 1. Just got away from me with filming. We're trying to get things done. Got all the engine cleaned up and got all that grease and nastiness off there. Found a few bits and pieces in the cam cover area that needed to be sorted out. Some of the seals weren't the greatest in there. Somebody in the past had not done a great job, and it's very important with these engines to make sure that all the seals on the timing covers are good, so that they sealed keep the mud and dirt and water out. As it turned out, when we pulled it down, all the bearings were shot. The belt itself wasn't in bad shape, but all the bearings are very noisy, and I suspect that's probably because it's got sand and dust and dirt in there in the past, and that wasn't real good for it. So it's a good thing that we are doing the maintenance on this. Time to get on with it. Got plenty to do today. I'm going to try and get the engine back in the car. It's booked to go on the dyno in only another day or so, so we've got to really get cracking. Just going to check the cam timing again and make sure that's all good, and then start putting this all back together, and then get the clutch and flywheel on it, and then it should be pretty much ready to go back in the car, and we can keep pushing on with it. It's now 4 o'clock on day 2, and it's been a bit of a slower day, but there is progress. So a fair bit of the engine work is done. Obviously it's bolted back into the car now, which is good. That was a bit of a muck around. Sometimes they go in easy and sometimes they're just a bit of fiddling around. But anyway, it's back in and bolted in, and it's going to be time to start putting all the ancillaries and everything back on it now and get it running. I would like to keep going on this, however today unfortunately it's not a possibility. I just got other things I need to do this afternoon, so it's time to pack this up for today, and it's going to be a very long day tomorrow to get this thing done in our 3-day time limit. The moment of truth. I haven't put any coolant in it yet. Just going to see if this is going to fire up now, given all the work that we've done to it. There's no reason why it shouldn't, but you just never know. All right. Finally, turning my attention to the ECU, which should be the last thing, well not quite the last thing, but one of the last things to do on the list anyway, and probably one of the fairly time consuming issues in its own right. So this is a standard ECU, however at some point in the past it's had what's called an EcuTech tune on it. I don't know whether the camera will pick up that that sticker. Now an EcuTech tune can be done on a 99 or a 2000 and upwards models of WRX. Effectively what they do is they hack the factory software, and the ECUs are programmable to some degree, and so you can do some tuning. Basically it's some adjustments of timing and fuel, etc, etc, within the parameters of the factory ECU. So it's nowhere near as good as having a fully programmable ECU. However, it can help a little bit. Say you change exhaust on your system, or change a turbo, or air filter setup, or all of the above sort of thing, and it just needs a mild retune to get everything right. Then this EcuTech tune, it works very, very effectively for that, and it can be a cheaper option. We don't deal with these EcuTech tunes. It's basically a software licensing. Somebody's worked out how to hack the software. You buy the license, and then that allows you to program it. It does require a dyno tune, or it should be on a dyno to get it right. Instead we're going to take this out because we want the full functionality of the programmable ECU. Link ECU wiring is going to go into this. Yes, we could have used a plug and play ECU, which meant pulling this board out of this can, swapping it over, which we've done on most of the other rally cars, and normally would do that. However, Link had a sale on wiring ECUs not too long ago, and we needed a couple for some other cars that we were doing, so we grabbed one for this while we're at it, and we're going to wire it in instead. It is a bit more time consuming, however it'll have exactly the same functionality, and it also, in the last I've done 2 of these in the last 2 weeks, these wiring ECUs, and this one's probably going to be the same. Every time we've opened the cover off and had a look at the wiring around the ECU, we found drama in there. Somebody's cut into it or wired or done something that's questionable around it, and at least by putting a wire in ECU, we can make sure that all the wiring that goes into the ECU is correct, and rectify any issues in there that cause a problem. So it's now 10 to 5 in the afternoon, and all the wiring is pretty much completed. Still looks like a bit of a mess, needs to be tidied up. However, it's all terminated. I've just got to configure the ECU and then try and start it. So fingers crossed. Right, let's give this a kick in the guts and see if it'll start. Yes, just like that, it's fired up. We got the RPMs going very high. Okay, so using my phone for the end of this video, hopefully it comes out okay. The camera battery has gone flat. It has been touch and go to get this thing ready to go in time. We were really right down to the wire with the deadline. We did manage to get it onto the dyno for tuning, which was great with the ECU installed in it. That in itself was interesting. The power steering pump decided to be noisy and fooled around with all sorts of bits and pieces with it and took it in and out a few times trying to get it sorted. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to. It's still whining. It's not the end of the world. It is working, but it's not in great shape. So we've had to order a couple of new power steering pumps. So we got one in stock just in case we get another drama with one of these in the future. Anyway, that is done. Also, another interesting one was on the dyno, wasn't a problem, but moving the car, we discovered it had a buckled front brake rotor in it. Now that's an unusual one for these cars, it's not common. And the last time we used the car, it was fine. So must have got hot at some point and then it's got some water on it, gone through a puddle or something, and it's got a slight buckle in the rotor. Anyway, brand new rotors up front and pads, and that's sorted that out. So that issue is now under control. There is a couple of other developments that we were hoping to show you, but we just ran out of time to get them in. There are some interesting things that are coming through in the pipeline, so keep your eye on that. It'll come up in a future video of what we're up to with doing that. It'll some pretty cool stuff that we can do with the aftermarket ECUs and some other bits and pieces that we're working on. So right, I'm going to sign off for this video because we've got to keep going and get this thing into the event and ready to go. So thanks very much for watching. Hope you've enjoyed this short video on getting this car done for a deadline. Please like, it's important to the YouTube algorithm, and subscribe, and we'll catch you again soon. Cheers.